I'm excited to be here today because I love stories. And so I'm going to take you on a journey with me today that's a little bit different with my story. So you see, I grew up in a small town in Kansas where storytelling is an art, it's a way of life. And even as a kid, I'd leave school and I'd head over to my favorite place in the world, my Grandma B's, where she'd be waiting for me with fresh coffee, cookies. We'd grab our cups, we'd go sit at the table, and she'd start the conversation with the same question. "How are you?" she'd ask. "Now tell me everything that there is about your day." And you know, she meant it as she sat nodding her head, deeply listening, wanting to hear what I had to say. And it didn't matter to her that I was a fearless tomboy, a fierce competitor, independent, absolutely prone to pushing the limits, quick to anger. And after I would be finished, it would be her turn, and she would tell me about the book she was reading that day, and story after story about the people, about life and death in our little town. I belonged to this place. I belonged to these people. And more than anything, I felt safe. So what is safe? Well, you know, I looked up the meaning of safe, and it's simple, but profound. Free from danger and harm. And that is exactly how I felt in my little town, moving around in my life freely and safely. So much so that I finished high school with honors in sports and music and went to college on a basketball scholarship, and then on to graduate school where I became a teaching assistant and a women's college coach. And you know what? I loved my safe life. It only took 1 second for all that to end. And all I did is what I had done thousands of nights before. I simply went for a run. When someone that I had never seen before ran up behind me, slammed a knife into my neck, viciously pulled me to the side of the road where he raped me. Then he tried to kill me. And I fought back. I prosecuted and we convicted. And you know, for me, that was a very good thing. But there were a couple of things that happened to me during that process. And the first thing was I became that woman that everybody whispers about. The second thing that happened was I found out that, you know, he might be going to prison, but he had violent family members who lived close by. And I don't know what I was told exactly, but what I heard is that I had to stay now unlisted, unseen, unfound, unknown, invisible. So how can it be that a person that we've been all our entire life just disappear? And that's what happened to me. And the new me showed up in this 24/7 war zone in my head, nightmares at night, completely housebound by depression and fear during the day. For the first time in my life, I couldn't move. Well, my roommates and I thought about getting a gun, and then we thought that through. So instead, we went out and we got Max. So Max was an abused German Shepherd, and frankly, he was more scared than I. And I wondered, now how is this going to work? As Max and I headed towards the front door, and you know, we opened the door and a car backfired, and we both hit the floor, useless. And it took Max and I a very long time to make it out to the sidewalk. It took us forever to get to the end of the block. But we did, and my new reality hit. I might be able to make it out the door with Max, but I would never feel safe in this place again. So you know what? I moved. I left it all, my 4 generations of family, my home, my hopes and my dreams, my friends, and I grabbed a bottle of scotch, Max, and drove into what I call the wilderness. So now we therapists have all sorts of wonderful names for the wilderness: post-traumatic stress disorder, addiction, trauma, co-occurring disorders. But I tend to call the wilderness exactly what it is: deep harm. The kind of deep harm that is profoundly damaging, and it runs deep. You know, the kind of harm that is just heartbreaking and soul-shattering. So I drove thousands of miles from job to job, place to place, relationship to relationship. And I tried desperately to outrun the pain of what had happened to me, to try to be somebody else. I had nightmares by night and scotch, thank God, holding it all together. Until one day, I heard myself say to a friend, you know, my life is never going to change unless I get help. You know, it's funny because there I'd been driving in the wilderness all by myself, lost, isolated, and not once had I ever thought about asking for help. Wasn't even in my psyche, and I doubt if I'm alone in that today. So my friend took me to an event where an older woman was standing on the stage, and she didn't look like me, she didn't talk like me, she didn't act like me, but she told her story, and it was my story. And you know, there she was, whole and intact on the stage and laughing. Oh, I so wanted what she had, and so I took a risk and I went up and I asked her, would she please help me? She said, absolutely, let's go. Violence might have been the event in my life, but truly, healing deep harm became my journey. Soon after Joan, I went to a therapist, and you know what I loved about that therapist? She probably knew every disorder that I'd caught in the wilderness, but she never mentioned it. Instead, she listened, her head nodding, deeply listening, wanting to hear what I had to say. So I went back to school again, and I wanted to learn everything that there is about the wilderness, but especially about this marvelous, creative, resilient thing we call the human soul, and how we get well. It took only one letter for all that to stop. And that letter said, you know, this guy you put in prison's now coming up for parole. Well, now my name is tied to his and my identity to this crazy violence. I stopped again. Grandma B, who's now toward the end of her life, who knows my story, calls me and she says, you know, sweetie, he's the one in prison, you're not. Oh, really? I said, because it doesn't feel that way to me. I had felt so angry and so hurt for so long. And what I realized underneath all of it is how I really felt was empty. You know, that kind of emptiness that nothing is going to fix it. Not relationships, not money, not degrees. And I thought, now how's this going to work? When I got a call from a friend, she said, you know, we've started this special program in juvenile hall, and we want you to come and we want you to tell your story to these kids and listen to theirs. And I had nothing else to do but to walk through those locked jail doors into a room of 12 to 18-year-old faces from all backgrounds, all colors, sizes, shapes, boys and girls. And you know what happened is outpours my story, but the real deal. No hiding. And that room was dead silent. When a little boy, 12 years old, puts up his hand and he said, You know, I never use knives. I only use guns. And you know, I looked at him and he was serious. So I said to him, why don't you tell me your story? And you know what? He did, and guess what? It was so heartbreaking. He had been deeply harmed just like me. And that day I listened to story after story after story, and I realized these are my people. A 16-year-old girl pulled me aside on my way out, and she said, thank you so much for coming, because until I heard your story today, I never realized that what I did hurt people, including my family. And you know, she was right. It hurt my family, her family. That's when I realized, you see, there is no us and them. There is me and you. I had to change everything that I saw about my experience. I had to embrace it. And more than anything, I had to learn how to open my heart. But how do you do that? Well, for the last 7 years, I've listened to thousands of stories deeply, from women and children who have been sex trafficked, brutalized, who have had to leave their homes and had to leave their countries, to men, women, and boys and girls who have deeply harmed or been deeply harmed, or both. And what I realized, unless I bring relationship to that and bring heart to that, then violence stays out in the wilderness, stuck, unexpressed, isolated, and unsafe. But when I listen to your story and you listen to my story and we relate, that is where we find safety. That is where we find heart. My life changed. I am now the clinical director, and I work with just passionate people. And what we know is, you know, what we see as illness stays ill. But when we focus on wellness, we get well. A therapist friend of mine recently said, Jean, what is it that saved your life, do you think? And I said, you know, it's easy. Love. The kind of love sits and listens deeply, nodding its head, wanting to hear what I have to say. Safe love. So just 3 months ago, I went through my 6th parole process. My attack happened in 1981. It's been a 30-year journey, and all of these people went through that process with me. In fact, many of the faces you see there have been through this with me for 30 years. And you know that small town I come from? They went through it with me. So what I want to say is that it's all about relationship. It's all about love. And I have found my people. And I have found my place, and my heart has found its place. And my name is Jean Ray, and I can safely say this is a story we're sharing. Thank you.